Think about the trajectory of our world in the last 20 years and the ability of people over time to kind of accept each other and accept differences. And it's even pertinent today. It's more pertinent today than I think it's ever been. But it's a key issue. And I think one of the most important issues in conflict resolution is making sure you get it right. And the use of apology. I can't, when relationships get strong, think about your own lives. When you have a conflict with somebody, and then you make up, you kiss and make up, the relationship is strong. It's simple. That sounds like a really simple-minded thing. Think about your own relationships. And if you stay in conflict with somebody, relationships, dissipate. Okay, spending time together. Adolescents really need time together. One of the problems we're going to see, I'm foreshadowing here, is that, and I think one of the reasons for loneliness is that I think our teenagers and our school-age kids are overscheduled. They're working 24/7. When I was a kid, I was bored on Saturdays and Sundays. I would get on my bike and I would go look for a pickup basketball game or something. I would try to figure out what to do. I didn't know what to do, and I would hang out with my friends. But how many of our teens actually have the time to just hang out with their friends and process things together without worrying about school, sports, community service, their AP courses, getting into college? They're really worried about things. So, we don't allow for that. It's a problem. But teams, okay. So one of the things that actually was really promising, even during COVID, the one on the left is a COVID. That's Black Lives Matter, and the one on the right is about climate change. But teen activism has actually been. Our Gen Z population, I think the silver lining to this bleak picture about loneliness is that our teenagers, despite the fact that they are lonely, have never had greater social consciousness and anxiety than since I was in school. I went to college 67 to 71. Pretty cool time to go to school. With its liberation and civil rights, and we were in Vietnam, and all the activism that was going on, it binds these kids together. But it also was a source of incredible stress. Our Gen Zs are worried, and if you talk to any teenager, including your own, they're worried about politics, about social unrest, about health disparities, about disparities of people of color, about immigrants, about sexual assault. 1 in 5 sexual assaults, about LGBTQ populations, about climate change. Look at these storms that are taking place, and economic downturn, and they're worried that are they going to be okay? And look at the world that they're inheriting. So one of the things that people who are not really thoughtful and don't talk to a lot of teenagers, I have the privilege of doing that, talking to a lot of them. These issues are front and center in their world, and there's no doubt that there's a level of intense anxiety about all of these issues. Now, we can talk about how we can reassure them that we're going to work on these things, but the point I'm getting at here is that, the low-hanging fruit, and one of the things that makes me crazy in thinking about loneliness is that most, or many people, I should say, many researchers pin it on social media. We're too tied to social media. We don't have face-to-face contact, and that's the cause of all evil. Well, it's the cause of a lot of problems. There's no doubt about that. But on the other hand, there are other elements that our kids are going through now that we have to pay attention to. So, we want them to socialize away from technology. So how many of us can socialize away from technology? I mean, it turns out that parents, and there's a lot of research on this, parents are not the best role models for kids. I mean, think about it. How much can you be away from your cell phone or your tablet or your computer or not checking on things? So we're all hostages to digital media, and that's the downside of it. The other thing is that most parents don't know what their kids are doing online. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what apps they're using. They don't know what information they're getting. They don't know what they think is news and what's fake news and what's real news and what's verifiable and what's just. And how do we do that? So that gets us into a whole other area of media literacy, which we can talk about that. But that kind of misunderstanding is a breach, I think, between parents, caregivers, teams, and their development, and it's a source of loneliness. Okay, now participating in community events. Okay, so one of the things about the fact that I mentioned that only 16% of parents feel connected to their community, and this is based on thousands and thousands and thousands of people's response. It makes us feel disconnected. And one of the things that helps us feel connected is giving, making a contribution. And what that does is it releases this neurochemical called oxytocin in the brain. And oxytocin is what's released when you're feeling close to or connected with somebody. When you're cuddling with your pet, you're releasing oxytocin. When you're playing with your kids, you're releasing oxytocin. When you're doing all sorts of things that make connection, you're releasing oxytocin. So making a contribution. It turns out that giving, I mean, as much as our kids want to get, because we do live in a materialistic society, they want things, okay. But giving is much more powerful than receiving. And there's a lot of research on this. So here we see a couple kids, a little girl on the left, this is in the wake of 9/11, making a contribution, lighting the flag. After the Boston Marathon, this little guy is making a contribution. And whether it's, and after 9/11 and after major tragedies, helping a neighbor in distress, sending a card or something to folks in North Carolina who are underwater, doing something to help somebody else is an act of giving, and that really helps, and it makes you feel connected, even if you don't know that person. Okay? There's a lot about that. Recommendation 3. Okay. Help children and adolescents develop a strong, safe, and stable relationship with supportive adults and grandparents, teachers, coaches, counselors, and mentors. Okay. So, there's a lot in this slide, but let me just run through some of these things. So what can supportive adults do? Listen in a non-judgmental way. And just think about your own lives. And I'm as big a fault in this as anybody. I mean, my kids and my grandchildren say to me, will you just shut up and listen? Because I talk too much, and I interrupt. I know that about myself, but I can't help it, okay? So I have to kind of say, I'm sorry, and zip it. All right, validate feelings. Initiate conversations, and actually, if you start conversations early, like preschoolers, it becomes a fabric of discussion. So oftentimes, we don't really talk to our kids, or talk with our kids, I should say. Enlisting empathy, provide reflection, consider alternate ways of thinking. I mean, one of the reasons why games like Dungeons and Dragons, which I don't play, but some kids that I know do, and some adults that I know do, is that you see alternate universes. You're using your fantasy to actually project a part of yourself into the game and bring it out. Okay. Support an interactive dialogue. Intervene with directives. So if the kid's really in trouble, you got to do something. You can't just sit there. Most of the time, what my favorite supervisor told me is, don't just do something. This was what she said about good therapy. So I'm a therapist. Don't just do something. The therapist is sort of laughing about this. Don't just do something. Sit there. Which is absolutely the gospel. So, I've got to just sit there. We should try to be role models. This is super important. I've talked about this. Apologize if you get it wrong. Okay. Accept the advice. So this is another thing that we don't typically do that both enhances self-esteem and brings about connection. And that is, ask your kids to give you advice. How often do we ask our teenagers to give us advice? Unless we're stuck on some technological mess, we can't get well, they're digital natives, right? We're digital immigrants, most of us, okay? So when I say digital natives, they've grown up with technology, you know? My 4-year-old can use the computer better than I can, okay? So accept the advice of each child, foster well-being through self-care, and creative arts. The creative arts piece is so important because there's so much research. I wrote a book before that book as I was sitting getting my infusions, okay? So I wrote a book on music and the arts for health. It's a whole series. It's Emerald Publishing Company. And I'm a musician, so I really thought it would be great fun to kind of really look up music. It's a universal language. Okay, so what does data show us about how music can help us feel better, feel more connected? And sure enough, it is incredible. Okay. Who among us, so what can we do? So grandparents. We can bring our adult kids. We can give advice to our adult children if they'll listen. You know, we can support parental rules, but we can also spoil them. I'm speaking as a grandfather. I have 9 grandchildren. And this is the most important one. Kids, as well as adults, love stories. They love stories. And it's no doubt that narratives and storytelling is the way every spiritual community in history has used narratives, whether it's the Torah, the Quran, you know, the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, you name it. And oral tradition in various different cultures uses narratives, because narratives and storytelling, they're co-created by listener and teller. It's not, I tell you a story and you accept it as the truth and that's the end of it. Storytelling involves give and take. So I remember when my mom was alive, she died at 102 a few years ago, and my kids used to love to hear grandma, and great-grandma, tell the story about the Great Depression. Tell us the story about the Great Depression. She was a concert pianist, and but the Depression hit. She couldn't go to college, so what'd she do? She played the piano in various department stores in New York City for change. Okay, so you know, the reason they love that story is because she would talk about the adversity of the Great Depression, and then about World War II, and how my father went to war, and how she was in New York, kind of fighting adversity the best she could to help support her family. They love stories. And think about your own families. Kids love to hear family stories. Okay, teachers, provide insight into the child. And teachers are super important here. I mean, you know, among the caregivers, I mean, teachers probably spend more time with our kids than anybody else, including us as parents and grandparents. And in terms of, maybe some coaches do, but teachers are really super important. And that's why schools are super important. So helping us support the role of teachers. I mean, how many of you, don't have to answer this, but I can think of my favorite teachers and I can see them and I can remember how I would go to them. And there weren't that many. There was like maybe 2 or 3 that I can think of, okay, that I really loved dearly. And interestingly, some of the ones that I loved the most were the strictest, hardest, most demanding, but I knew they cared about me in a different way. Okay. Coaches, you know, are also super important because what are sports? But you learn competition, you learn sports personship, you learn how to play by the rules, you learn what you do when the parents are screaming and yelling on the sidelines and embarrassing you because they're out of control. I mean, sometimes that happens, you know, and coaches have a real, connection with these kids, because they're teaching them they're teaching them about teams. Okay. She must have come to terms with something. So if all goes well, we hope. Okay, recommendation 4. Encourage healthy social connection with peers by supporting individual friendships as well as participation in structured activities such as volunteering, sports, community activities, and mentorship programs. Okay, so again, the causes of loneliness, I won't review them again, but they're all bound in relationships. And one of the things about teenage years that I think is super important is that it is in itself lonely, because our teenagers are separating from families, so separation, autonomy, self-sufficiency, being on your own, having your own identity apart from your family but being connected is a very lonely experience. But it's also lonely for parents. Adolescence is a loss. And I don't think any of us that have had teenagers can say that it's not. So things feel very immediate to the teenage brain. I know these will all be stories someday, and our pictures will become old photographs. We'll all become someone's mom or dad. But right now, these moments are not stories. This is happening. This is one moment when you know you're not a sad story. You are alive. Okay. So, you want to support healthy relationships. You want to have civil conversations. You want to manage. This is a review. We're learning to control our anger. Be mindful of your own emotional state, and use the creative arts. Okay. So now, how can we enhance the community? Well, our teenagers, as well as we, can do volunteer work. We can participate in sports. We can encourage peer mentorship. Okay, and we can take the golden rule. Recommendation 5. What time do we start? What time do we start?
6:30.
Oh, so I have till 7:30?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm rushing. Okay, be attentive to how young people spend their time online. Delay the age at which children join social media platforms, and monitor and decrease screen time in favor of positive, in-person connection building activities. Okay, well, that's a pretty good thing. But how do you do that? Because here's this guy. The Surgeon General's warning, loneliness is bad for your health. Like, it's not the way you do it. Okay. So, one thing I want to point out is that I give a talk on, I think I call it digital media for better or worse. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when my mother, think about my mother. She grew up, my great-grandfather in New York, got a radio. And she was turning on the radio to listen to some music, and he said, "Damn it, turn that thing off." Well, why'd you get it? Okay, he got it because of this new technology. If you want to hear a concert, you go to Carnegie Hall. Okay. Remember Bye Bye Birdie with the telephone? Whenever there's a new major invention, whether it's the light bulb or the radio or the telephone, or the movies, or now digital technology, it's got to be harnessed, it's got to be understood, it's got to be used appropriately, and then we've got to figure. But I think digital media is in a whole different realm because of the scale and the scope and the way we can do things so instantly, and I think it's much more powerful than these other technological advances. There are some benefits, and some of these we learned during the 2.5 years of lockdown in COVID. Fostered connection. I mean, my family, for example, we had a Spotify playlist. So everybody, including the grandchildren, would submit a song, and everyone in the family, and I'm talking about the family across the country, we all contributed, and we all had the same playlist, and who came up with which tunes, which was kind of neat. So, there are alternative routes for social participation, opportunities to find community. And I mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, but there are plenty of things that kids can do online. Reaching out for help. And how many kids will actually, plenty, by the way, will reach out for help by using social media. Documentation is important, and it's an academic resource. It's also really useful, for example, for kids, that have some psychiatric problems and developmental disabilities. So kids who are super shy, kids who are on the autistic spectrum, kids who have some developmental disabilities, and attention deficit disorder, and interrupting, they're hyperactive. Sometimes the use of digital media can be a real benefit, especially for the shy, withdrawn kids who are socially anxious. And they can at least take a first step by using social media, digital media, or ideally using FaceTime or Skype or Zoom, Instagram, to actually tell some stories and then hopefully take the next step. But what about the drawbacks? So it displaces in-person engagement, FOMO, fear of missing out. I mean, I was a spokesperson for SADS, Students Against Disruptive Decisions, for about 5 years. And I remember one meeting after that, I don't know if you saw the series 13 Reasons Why. Everybody was really scared about that, as was I. But I was 500 kids and about 250 parents were in the room. And I said, okay, how many of you kids think that your cell phones are too much drama, too much high drama, and it weighs you down? Every hand goes up. How many of you can let it go? All the hands go up. How many of you saw 13 Reasons Why? All the hands go up. How many of you parents saw 13 Reasons Why? Only maybe 3 out of 250. I mean, seriously. How many of you kids play video games on your digital media? All the hands go up. How many of you parents know about some of the scenes? This was way back when in Grand Theft Auto. No hands go up. I didn't want to say what some of these scenes were because I didn't want to shock them too much. The point is that one of the drawbacks is this disconnect between what parents and many teachers, coaches, and caregivers don't do, is know what our kids are actually using online, or talking with them about it, or asking them about it. Okay, so sometimes, and this is where it gets very funky, there's increased conflict due to reduced social connection, there's online harassment, and we're going to talk a little bit about cyberbullying and sexting, which can really cause big problems. Intrusion, trauma, stress, not knowing what's true or not true, and our brains in overdrive. Okay. So what can parents do? So there are 3 things that we should really do, I think, in terms of social media. And I can't go through this in great detail, but assess. Okay, be attentive to how your teams spend their time online. And I think it's just great to basically say, can you show me? And I am opposed 100% against scouring or looking at their cell phones or spying. Because what we want to do is we want to breed and inspire trust. Okay? And by the way, prohibition has never worked, not for alcohol and not for media, and kids will find a workaround. They'll go to their friends, they'll get it one way or another, or they'll find a way to break the parental controls. Now, there are ways of doing it and there are ways of not doing it. Okay, so regulate, set the limits. So I really do think that we do need to put some limits based on age, based on development, based on how aggressive they are, based on how worked up they get about it, based on as parents, we're the experts on our kids. So if you see your kids getting fired up by using digital media or video games, and they're acting up and they're acting in destructive ways, then you've got to or they're inappropriately texting or sending photos or whatever, you've got to do something. we'll come to this acronym WAIT in a second. And promote. I would encourage non-online activities that foster connection. Okay? I can tell you one really cool story about, I was not a great fan of digital media. I'm meeting with this guy who was a filmmaker, and he had done a great film for PBS on Viktor Frankl, and we were talking about nature, and he wanted to do something on nature and putting down the cell phones to get out there in nature. And I said, I hate these stupid cell phones. Let's put our phones away. We put them away. And then this was the day of the Boston Marathon of the bombing, the marathon bombing, and I knew that my second daughter was at the finish line. And I just couldn't help myself, but I said, wait a second. I don't typically get texts this time of day, so I got a text, and it was my daughter saying, I'm at the Union Oyster House. There was a bombing here at the Boston Marathon. I don't know what to do. Dad, what do I do? And I said, stay put. And then I went back to him and I said, I take it all back. I take it all back. If I didn't know where she was, that she was safe, when I found out about the bombing, or she said, I want to get out of here, I'm going to leave and go take off. And I said, please, don't. Which was okay, because after a couple of bombs went off, none further went off, but she could have been really hurt. I didn't know. It was an eye-opening experience for me because it showed me what can be done that's very helpful with the use of digital media. All right, so that's the promotion. So let's talk about WAIT. This, my friend, who actually was one of the first founders of the Clay Center with me, and this gal, Annie Fischel, who's head of couples and family therapy at Mass General. So they came up with this acronym WAIT. W, wide audience. And this, every time I show this to teenagers, they say, wow, this is really interesting. Okay, WAIT, W. Would I say this in front of the school assembly? This is before they're going to send a text or anything online. A, affect. Am I in a good emotional state right now? Or am I feeling really angry, upset, pissed off? Okay. Sad. I, intent. Might what I'm saying be misunderstood? And T, today, tomorrow, and I would say whenever. But if we could help teach our kids to use this acronym, we probably have a much safer use of online media. Okay, recommendation 6. Identify and aim to reduce behaviors and experiences that may increase the risk for social disconnection, including bullying and excessive harmful social media use. Now, I'm going to go a bunch of categories here. We can talk about them specifically later, but these are symptoms of experiences which increase social disconnection. And these are things that I think we all have to be worried about and try to understand better. Bullying is alive and well. About 1 out of 3 kids will be cyberbullied. Okay? Usually by somebody that they know. It's not the situation that strangers or predators do the cyberbullying. It's typically somebody that the kids know themselves. And it can result in lifelong trauma. Okay? Anxiety, depression, shame, low self-esteem, anger, distraction, whatever. Okay. Next is school refusal. Now, school refusal is not a diagnostic label, but there are plenty of reasons why kids don't go to school. And I won't go into all the differences. But that creates social disconnection. So if we're going to be talking about school refusal, whether it's panic attacks or whether it's social phobia or the various things that kind of keep kids at home, we need to see that as a red flag. Gaming disorder. This is a controversial thing, but you know the World Health Organization sees gaming disorder as a bona fide psychiatric disorder. The American Psychiatric Association says, well, we're not so sure. But the likelihood is that it probably does exist in about 3% of kids and adults who play video games. And they play in a way that's time-consuming. What you see is academic decline, difficulties in leaving the screen, limits of other activities, doesn't tell the truth about screen time, it refuses to participate with families, such as taking vacations and trips. So there are all kinds of things. Okay. Another problem area is peer pressure. So this is where conversations are super helpful, because sometimes you'll see your teenagers doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do, like get in a car with somebody that doesn't have a license who's intoxicated. That happens, okay? Or taking some drug as an experiment that they have no idea what the heck it is. So, but peer pressure can be less dramatic than that, but it is a risk for social disconnection. And finally, controlling relationships. And these are largely romantic relationships, but this is why it's so important to help your kids be able to talk with you, because there are numerous relationships, both in adolescence and in adulthood, that are unbalanced, that are controlling, that are destructive, and that are threatening. And we need to prevent these things from happening in the younger years, because otherwise they get repeated over time historically, and this is one of the reasons for domestic violence. And then harmful social media use, which I've talked a little bit about this. So I think we can skip over that. Hey Olivia, I like your hoodie. Thanks, Nick. Ready to go to lunch? They're texting. You've seen this in the halls, haven't you? I mean, you've seen this at home. You know, they text each other. They don't look each other in the face. So how do we reduce social disconnection? Well, I said this is a bit repetitious, but start early. Listen, validate. You know, everything that they, even if you disagree with what they're talking about, or you don't want to hear it, or you don't understand it, you know, what our teenagers say is valid for them. Okay, the final recommendation: talk to your children about social connection regularly to understand if they're struggling with loneliness or isolation. To destigmatize talking about these feelings and create a space for kids to share their perspectives and needs. So we want to have conversations. We want to start them early, and I've mentioned some of these things. And now, one of the things we talk about continually at the Play Center, and I know I'll write the blog. I have to write a blog about the W's. And they're important. And what we always try to do in our blogs or advice is to help parents, teachers, caregivers of all sorts know the 3 W's. What to look for. What are the signs of concern? So if you see that your kids are depressed, or they're not sleeping well, they're anxious, they're not eating right, there's a change in their personality, whatever. You know, they're socially isolated, they're slamming the door where they didn't used to do that. Okay. What to look for. When to worry. What is just, now this gets complicated, because what's just a phase? Kids go through phases. You know all your kids have gone through phases, right? So what's a phase and that you don't have to worry about, like the terrible twos? They pass, generally, okay? Or separation anxiety in younger kids generally passes, okay? They get through it, okay? But when to worry, and then what to do. And what to do is largely based on the secure attachments I was talking about, and that is have conversations with them, but also talk with each other, talk with the teachers, talk with other observers, you know, and most importantly is don't worry alone, and, you know, because if you're struggling alone and you're wondering, do I really need to worry about this? You know, you can't see yourself or others unless you have some reflection, unless you have a mirror, or unless you have, you know, the bigger picture. So, and then finally, if need be, seek professional help. I mean, there's no harm in getting a psychological or psychiatric evaluation for your kid, for yourself, for your family, or, you know, it helps. Okay, so now let's just review some of this. So the 7 recommendations that I mentioned: invest in your relationship with your child and loved one, model healthy social connections, help children develop strong relationships with supportive adults, encourage healthy social connections with peers, be attentive to how young people spend their time online, reduce behaviors that increase the risk for social disconnection, and talk to your kids about social connection regularly. Okay? So that's the review. And what are the tips? Extend yourself by giving to others, join a group, get a pet. There's nothing better. I mean, in COVID, you couldn't get pets during COVID. Couldn't get them. Everybody wanted, and you know something? For good reason. I mean, pets are really wonderful. Okay. Practice mindful awareness. That is being aware of yourself and your behavior and the behavior that your kids are demonstrating. Try to understand why you are lonely, why your kids are lonely. Immerse yourself in creative arts. And I think the other one is join a community. Join some kind of a mission. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's sports or whether it's something in school or whether it's 4-H or whether it's YMCA or, I mean, there are tons of things, you know, that we all can do in a communal fashion. Okay, alone we can do, this is Helen Keller. Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. Most important, don't worry alone. Okay, that's it, 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have 15 minutes for discussion. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Somebody did send in a question, so I'm going to read it. Okay. My 12-year-old has ADHD, which compounds the challenges of being a teenager and navigating friendships. My teen is currently experiencing many long-term friendships starting to fizzle out. This is obvious by being excluded in conversations, not being included in plans, getting snubbed, or seeing eyes rolling back at them.
So there actually, it's a very important observation, and there was a recent research paper in the Journal of Pediatrics that looked at kids with ADHD and found that they were lonelier than almost any other kid. And there's a good reason for that, because the hyperactive kids with ADHD who are hyperactive, they're all over the place, they're in your face, they're interrupting, they're butting in line, you know, they're just basically not fun to be around, so they're dismissed. And then they're the ones who the ones that are not, that we don't notice as much, are the inattentive types. The ones who are like space cadets. I mean, they're kind of like, you know, they're not in your face, they're not interrupting, but they're internalizing, and they're kind of like, they're like out of it. So, and they are disconnected because they're not making you know, human interactions fun or interesting or desirable. So what do? Well, I think the first thing is that, you know, ADHD is incredibly treated. Number one, it is a disorder, regardless of what you may think. But it's one of the most treatable disorders around. Now, not, as we say in pediatrics, not all the wheezes is asthma. Not all that's in attention is ADHD. So one of the things you want to do for a kid that potentially has ADHD is get a psychiatric evaluation, get neuropsychological testing that can be done here in school, testing that can be done privately, see if something else is going on that's compounding the ADHD. Often ADHD has other associated problems like depression, anxiety, and sometimes obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, so you want to be sure that you know what you're dealing with. And, you know, what's important is the use of medications. This is where meds really do help. And, you know, meds are not the answer. Meds are only kind of, you know, it's like running with weights on your legs. The way I describe to parents and say, well, I don't want meds, doc. I don't want medications. Okay, well, that's fine. We can work without the meds. But it's going to be, and because the hallmark of treating ADHD is is using various behavioral techniques to improve what's called executive functioning. Keeping things in order, setting priorities, learning how to shut your mouth when you want to interrupt, minimizing distractions, asking to be moved away from kids who are like, in your face and revving you up, whatever. There are all sorts of wonderful behavioral things that need to be done. It turns out that the use of various medications can actually take those weights off your legs and help the behavioral techniques work better. But the long-term insurance for kids that have ADHD is really the behavioral treatments that are the mainstays. So what I would say to that person is get an evaluation, see what else is going on, see if it's compounded, and get that kid into treatment of one kind or another based on the testing and based on the assessment, which is both probably going to be a combination of pharmacology and mostly behavioral management. And they probably won't be lonely. Because the other thing about ADHD is that I think it should be a criteria. It should be in the diagnostic criteria. I don't know one kid that I've seen over many, many, many years with ADHD that doesn't have low self-esteem, doesn't feel terrible about themselves, because they know that they can do things that they should be able to do, but they just can't get themselves to do it because their attention is short, or they're not organized, or they're dysregulated, and it's tragic. But there's hope, because when they succeed, they really can take off. And there have been plenty of incredibly important people who probably have ADHD, like Einstein. Probably ADHD.
So that was my question.
It has nothing to do with intelligence. Is not part of that diagnostic criteria.
So, and I appreciate your feedback. In my situation, I have had my daughter evaluated. She is on medication. So I guess, when we talk about loneliness, it is behavioral and learning how to, control, regulate, speaking and doing and so forth. But it's difficult because, your peers don't always accept what you still haven't been able to regulate.
Right.
So my concern or question is, what do you do for a kid, 12 years old, and they see their friends pulling away, and actually is very outgoing, that makes new friends and so forth, but just like, can't figure it out.
So I think there's a couple techniques that are useful. One is, well, first of all, you're the expert when you're 12-year-old, so you don't need a ton of friends. I mean, for example, these kids that have ADHD, if that's what your 12-year-old has, they don't do well in large crowds. So start small. I mean, if they have one or two friends, just playing with each other in a small setting, a play date, in your home, outside, at the other kid's house, and they can start, baby steps. That was the Richard Dreyfuss. That was the kind of movie that, start at a small level and build up to where they can manage a larger crowd is number one. But the other thing that we're not doing enough of, and not every school in Massachusetts is required to have social emotional learning modules for our kids. So, what I think I'm really fired up about is providing social emotional learning modules to destigmatize mental disorders, psychiatric disorders. I mean, the brain is an organ of the body, right? I mean, if your kid has asthma or migraines or diabetes or whatever, oh, that's okay. Well, the kid, I can't go and play because it's cold out, and I can't go over to your house because there's a dog and I get allergies. Those things are acceptable. But what's not acceptable, because we're still in the dark ages about this, is, at any one point in time, 1 in 4 people will have a psychiatric disorder. In the course of a lifetime, 1 in 2. It's more common than strep throat. And yes, there's more stigma, there's more misinformation, there's more hardship that are imposed on all of us. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to do this, but when I do some lectures sometimes, I say, how many of you either have a psychiatric problem or know somebody in your family that does? Every hand goes up. Every hand goes up, all the time. Because if you look at the data, it's everywhere. And whether it's, and that includes learning disabilities, which is 20%, that's pretty high number, 1 in 5. Okay, autistic spectrum disorder, which is increasing, it used to be 1 in 100, now it's 1 in 36. Okay? I mean, if you include substance use disorders, I mean, and then you include all these psychiatric disorders, I mean, including trauma, okay, it's everywhere. And yet, what are we doing to humanize it and to destigmatize it? You know, it's you know, the way my hope would be that we'd be able to be talking about depression, which is the #1 global burden of illness in the world. That is the #1 source of disability, loss of income, family disruption, suicide, is depression, globally. It's not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's not even malnutrition, it's depression. So, but if I were to ask many adults, teachers, clergy, cops, teenagers, can you tell me the diagnostic criteria? Can you tell me what is biological? What is a biological depression look like? Very few people can. Now, that's not a criticism. It's just because we don't know. If you could say, can you tell me what a panic attack is? People are more likely to do that because panic attacks are much more acceptable than depression. But so what I would say is the 2 things that I would suggest. That's 1, find forums in which your kid can play and have a really good time and feel good about themselves, #1. And then #2, promote forums, whether it's places of worship or schools or community organizations, to actually talk about depression or ADHD or various other emotional problems.
I think it would be good if the schools offered some kind of social cues in general, just for kids. Like, because you have just regular, kids that don't have ADHD that are mean. They bully kids, they roll their eyes, they don't realize when you turn your back on a kid and how that affects them. So I do think in school it would be good that they had some kind of, social behavior in general.
Mm-hmm.
How to treat people, the golden rule, because it affects every kid, and that's what fosters loneliness.
Right.
Because it's hard enough to be a teenager, just in general, like middle school is like the worst time, right?
Oh.
So,
It's the
I
worst.
think, and my daughter does not have a phone, and she has an iPod, so we limit, but, she can, want to play the games, and, everything you talked about is very familiar for me.
Yeah.
But, it would be good if schools addressed something like that.
Well, they're
They
supposed
really
to.
don't.
Well, every school is supposed to. I mean, it's a statewide mandate, and so schools are supposed to have social emotional learning curriculum. But it hasn't taken off. Although there have been, like CASEL, for example, if you really want to learn about social emotional learning, CASEL is, if you go to CASEL, is the longest standing social emotional learning organization in the country, and it has fabulous material. Yeah.
I was just piggybacking off of what she said. A lot of social emotional learning happens for the kids that are having a hard time. And I think that's the mix-up in schools.
Right.
So the kids that are getting excluded are learning about exclusion, right? Where the kids that are excluding aren't learning about it.
Right.
And I think that's the flip-flop, and that's the biggest problem. I work in schools, I see it a lot too. My daughter also has a hard time. She's in middle school.
So one of the things, Michelle.
But how do we get there? Like, that's the problem.
We were asked to consult with the Worcester Public Schools. 55 schools. I mean, the second largest one next to Boston. And we were asked about a social emotional learning curriculum. We divided it between preschool, school age, middle school, and high school. I mean, so we had them divided up. But the point of it is that one of the things that I think is so cool about building it into school, like one of the things, and this is a problem with overscheduling. I mean, what many principals will say, and it's not their fault, is that where are we going to put it?
Yeah, no, I agree.
There's no time. I mean, we've got to teach all these sciences. We've got to teach math. We've got to teach the basic stuff. We've got to have, sports. We've got to do, health education. Well, oh, you do? Okay, so that's one place for it. But you know something? That's really not always the best place for it, because they have, and there's so many things that the kids have to do. In terms of community service, in terms of special projects, in terms of you name it. So they're overscheduled. So where do you fit it in? So one of the things that we're suggesting is, yes, there can be a social emotional learning curriculum. And for example, of all places, in the Lawrence Public Schools, because I'm very close with a teacher there who's been teaching middle school, and if you can imagine, middle school in Lawrence for 15 years. I don't know how he does it, but what he says is what each teacher does is they give up 1 hour a month of their classroom time for a social emotional learning module. And the other thing that we thought that would be really cool is, and there are models for this, is why can't we integrate it with English, with social studies, with science and biology? So for example, when they're doing biology, they can learn about the neurobiology of the brain. Hello? I mean, when they're doing social studies, they can learn something about different cultures and different cultural syndromes and the way people around the world handle different kinds of psychosocial issues that are super important. And English, I mean, come on, how many, when you're reading Catcher in the Rye, which is kind of basic, reading, or any of the basic readings, there can be discussions about taking a lens and making it social emotional learning, and having exercises or essays or discussions that kind of bring it home to your own life. I mean, it's going to take some creativity and innovation to build it into the curriculum, but I think the hybrid model, building some of it into the curriculum and having some of it as a standalone where each teacher will give up 1 hour a month, which is not so big. Even though you have a lot of stuff in your ed plans. Okay, you can do that. So it can be put into schools. But it's going to take a major movement to do that.
I'll also add, because I'm in the district, right, that I think what can also be done is, it's not that it's not happening, I think it's just the level at which that communication is going on to parents and caregivers to really understand that they are starting to think about how to do this and how to integrate, which they haven't done before. So whether they're doing it or not, we may not know unless we're in an environment where then a teacher is saying that.
Well, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if all the parents got the curriculum that the students were learning in various different classes and could integrate that with what they're doing at home?
I think it is more at a district level of how they're communicating what's being done. So when I went to middle school open house, or whatever it was, back to school night, and the English teacher was saying, where one of the books we're reading is O.C. Daniel. And I never would have known that if I wouldn't have gone, which I almost did not know. But if that had been shared in another, as another vehicle of, we do care about this, and we are doing, because I know the district is, it's just we don't really know what they're doing.
So one of the things we're trying to do at the Clay Center is have social emotional modules to help parents learn to be facilitators of social emotional kind of learning at home or in places of worship or in community organizations, so that parents can be involved. One of the things that we've learned, and this has to do with social emotional learning, gun violence, many different social issues, is that and this is particularly true for development, when you have repetition or variance of a certain area that you want to work on, in all the places where a student lives, on this playing field, the classroom, at home, in places of worship, things get integrated. So it's a matter of connecting the dots. And that's going to take a certain amount of creativity and innovation, but also advocacy, because, you know, I mean, change is difficult. Yeah.
Just in the discussion that happened about social emotional learning in school, I know they had all along quite a bit of anti-bullying. So, I mean, I'm just kind of wondering how much is going into that bucket so there isn't a broader social emotional learning, or is that the anti-bullying stuff, in fact, what you guys are saying is important?
Well, no, bullying is absolutely part of a social emotional learning curriculum. There's no doubt about that, because bullying is, especially cyberbullying, but, you know, dismissing, excluding, hurting other kids is very, very prominent. It's, you know, and it's pervasive. So I think it should be included, you know, among other things. But it's not, but I think what's important is that there's all different kinds of bullying that occurs in different sectors of a child's life. There's bullying, and only a small percentage of bullying right now is physical bullying. Very small, you know, maybe 20%. Most of it, 80% of it is cyberbullying. But it can be very painful. But if it's only discussed in one classroom setting, if it's not, I mean, one school that I was involved with in Lake Wales, Florida, in the middle of, I don't want to say nowhere, but it was, the principal actually had me come down, and I was involved with this school, and she was fabulous, and she had been in a private school teaching in all places in the Hamptons. Okay? But she chose to go down to this charter school in Florida. And they had a major campaign that, you know, it's called I Am My Brother's Keeper. Okay? Now, it wasn't just focused on bullying, it was focused on all sorts of support. But there were posters in all the classes, these principals, the 10 principals that were kind of like reviewed over and over again. You know, and what happened over time was that college acceptances went, college entry went up, sportsmanship went up, delinquency and detentions went way, way, way down. I mean, the behavior of the kids was just impressive, because what she did, with the help of a peer counseling group, of having students as kind of leaders of this movement, including the students, the parents, coaches, and the entire and spiritual leaders in the community. There were 5 churches that were involved as well. Is that everybody was invested in making things change. And so the kids that were outliers, that would be bullying, were like seen as variants. Now, it took her about 5 to 10 years to get to that point, but it was super impressive. But when you change an entire community like that, which you can do, you can see amazing results. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.